College is a waste of money, Jessica. You're throwing your life away for some piece of paper that won't put food on the table. Those were the last words my stepfather Marcus bellowed at me before he threw my acceptance letter into the trash can. Right there in our cramped kitchen in Bakersfield, California, while my mother Linda stood behind him nodding like some kind of programmed robot. Like I hadn't just earned a full academic scholarship to UC Berkeley. Like I was asking them to fund my education instead of celebrating that I'd found a way to pay for it myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez, and if you're watching this from wherever you are right now, I need you to stay with me through this story. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about family betrayal or educational dreams deferred. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to lift you up spend years trying to clip your wings and then act shocked when you learn to fly anyway. It's about the moment when their mockery turns to silence, when their dismissal becomes desperation, and when the daughter they called too big for her britches becomes the person holding the deed to the house they thought would always be theirs. See? There's something most people don't understand about being the first in your family to pursue higher education. It's not just about you wanting something different. It's about everyone around you taking that want as a personal insult to the life they've chosen. Every book you read becomes evidence that you think you're smarter than them. Every late night, studying becomes proof that you're putting on airs. Every conversation about your future becomes a threat to their present reality. I was 17 when I first mentioned wanting to go to college. We were sitting around our worn-out dining table, the one with the cigarette burn from when Marcus fell asleep smoking again, eating microwaved burritos because nobody in our house knew how to cook a real meal. I had just gotten my SAT, scores back. 1450, not perfect, but high enough to open doors I'd only dreamed about. I think I want to study business, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, like I was mentioning wanting to try a new flavor of ice cream. Maybe get an MBA. Eventually, start my own company. The silence that followed wasn't the good kind. It was the kind that makes your stomach drop and your palms sweat. Marcus put down his burrito and looked at me like I'd just announced I was joining a cult. Business? He said, and the way he said it made the word sound dirty. What business? You think you're going to be some hotshot CEO? Newsflash, kid. People like us don't run companies. We work for them, if we're lucky. My mother, who had been scrolling through Facebook on her cracked phone screen, finally looked up. Jessica, honey, you need to be realistic. College costs money we don't have. Even if you got some kind of scholarship, there's still books and food and all that other stuff. Why don't you just get a job at the Walmart like your cousin Brittany? She's making decent money there. Decent money. Brittany was making $11 an hour and living in a studio apartment with her boyfriend who sold car parts on Craigslist. That was their definition of success. That was the ceiling they wanted me to accept for my life. But here's what they didn't know, what I hadn't told them yet because I was still processing it myself. I had already applied to 12 universities. I had spent months crafting essays, gathering recommendation letters from teachers who believed in me when my own family wouldn't, and researching scholarship opportunities that could make my dreams financially possible. I wasn't asking for their permission anymore. I was informing them of my decision. Actually, I said, pulling the letter from my backpack, the one I'd been carrying around for 3 days like some kind of golden ticket. I already got accepted to UC Berkeley, with a full ride. I placed the letter on the table between the burrito wrappers and the stack of unpaid bills that seemed to live there permanently. For a moment, nobody moved. Marcus stared at the official university letterhead like it was written in a foreign language. My mother's eyes went wide, but not with pride, with something that looked almost like fear. Full ride? She whispered. What does that mean? It means they're paying for everything. Tuition, room and board, even books. They want me there badly enough to invest in me. I couldn't keep the pride out of my voice anymore. This was huge. This was everything I'd worked for since I was 14, and realized that the adults in my life had given up on their dreams, but I didn't have to give up on mine. Marcus picked up the letter, and for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought he was going to congratulate me. Instead, he started reading it out loud in this mocking voice, like he was performing some kind of comedy routine. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected," he snorted. "Outstanding academic achievement." Another snort. "Full scholarship recipient." And then he looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Not anger, not disappointment, but something worse. Contempt. "You know what this is, Jessica? This is you thinking you're better than us. This is you deciding that the life your mother and I built isn't good enough for precious little Jessica Martinez. You want to go play pretend with a bunch of rich kids who are going to eat you alive the second you open your mouth and they hear that Bakersfield accent." "That's not what this is about," I said, but my voice was getting smaller. The confidence I'd felt carrying that letter for 3 days was starting to crack. This is about opportunity. This is about building a better future. "Better than what?" my mother asked, and there was hurt in her voice now. Real hurt. "Better than your family? Better than the people who raised you and kept a roof over your head and food in your stomach?" And that's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't about money or practicality or even concern for my well-being. This was about them, taking my success as evidence of their failure. My acceptance letter wasn't a celebration of what I'd accomplished. It was a judgment on what they hadn't. "I'm not saying you failed," I tried to explain. But Marcus was already standing up, his face red with the kind of anger that comes from feeling small. "I'm saying I want to try something different. Different." He said the word like it tasted bad. "You know what's different about you, Jessica? You're ungrateful. Your mother worked her ass off to keep you fed and clothed, and this is how you repay her? By telling the world that what she did wasn't enough?" "I never said that. You didn't." "Have to say it. This letter says it for you." And then he did something that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. He tore the letter in half, right down the middle, splitting my future into 2 jagged pieces. The sound it made was so small, just a quick rip, but it echoed in that kitchen like a gunshot. My mother gasped. I stood there staring at the pieces in his hands, feeling something inside me break that was much bigger than a piece of paper. "There," he said, dropping the pieces into the trash can with the coffee grounds and the used napkins. "Problem solved. No more college dreams. No more pretending you're something you're not. Time to join the real world like the rest of us." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I reached into the trash can and pulled out both pieces of my letter. They were stained with coffee grounds and smelled like garbage, but the words were still readable. The promise was still there. "This doesn't change anything," I said quietly. "They didn't just send me 1 copy." Marcus's face went from red to purple. "Oh, you think you're smart? You think you've got it all figured out? Well, let me tell you something, little girl. You want to go play college so bad? You can do it without our help, without our house, without our support, without us. See how far that scholarship gets you when you're sleeping under a bridge." "Marcus," my mother said, but her voice was weak, uncertain. "No, Linda. She made her choice. She wants to be too good for this family? Fine. She can see what life is like without one." And that's when I understood. This wasn't an ultimatum designed to change my mind. This was an eviction notice disguised as parental concern. They weren't trying to save me from making a mistake. They were punishing me for having the audacity to want more than what they'd settled for. I looked at my mother, hoping she'd step in, hoping she'd remember that she used to tell me I could be anything I wanted when I was little. But she just stood there, trapped between her husband's anger and her daughter's dreams, and she chose him. "If that's how you really feel," I said, folding the torn pieces of my letter carefully and putting them in my pocket, "then I guess we're done here." I walked to my room, the tiny space I'd shared with my younger stepbrother Tyler until he moved in with his girlfriend 6 months earlier, and started packing. I didn't have much. A few changes of clothes, my laptop that I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the movie theater, my textbooks, and a shoebox full of letters from colleges and scholarship organizations. Evidence of a future they couldn't see and didn't want to believe in. When I came back to the living room with my 2 suitcases, they were both sitting on the couch watching TV like nothing had happened. Like their daughter hadn't just been disowned for the crime of academic achievement. "I'll be gone by tonight," I said. Marcus didn't look away from the screen. "Good. Maybe now Tyler can have his room back when he needs it." My mother finally looked at me, and for a second I thought she might change her mind. But she just said, "Make sure you return your house key." I placed it on the coffee table next to Tyler's empty beer bottles and Marcus's cigarette pack. 17 years of living in that house, of being their daughter, reduced to a single key on a worn-out keychain shaped like a butterfly that I'd made in elementary school art class. "One more thing," I said as I reached the front door. Both suitcases were heavy, but not as heavy as the weight in my chest. "When I graduate with honors in 4 years, when I start that business I told you about, when I'm successful enough to buy a house twice the size of this one, don't you dare act proud. Don't you dare tell people you always believed in me. And don't you dare come looking for help when you realize that the daughter you threw away was the only one in this family with any ambition." Marcus finally looked at me then. "You think you're gonna be rich? You think that piece of paper is gonna magically make you successful? Wake up, Jessica. The world's full of college graduates flipping burgers and living with their parents. You'll be back here begging us to take you in before Christmas." I smiled at him, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been given the most powerful motivation in the world, the burning desire to prove them wrong. "We'll see about that," I said, and walked out into the California sunshine with my future in 2 suitcases and my acceptance letter in my pocket, ready to show them exactly what this piece of paper could do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That first night sleeping in my 2003 Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour Denny's, I learned something they don't teach you in high school. Homelessness doesn't announce itself with dramatic music. It creeps up on you quietly, starting with the realization that you have nowhere to charge your phone and escalating to the humbling discovery that public restrooms become your morning routine. I had $17 in my wallet, a tank of gas. That was 3/4 full, and exactly 63 days until freshman orientation at UC Berkeley. The math was simple and terrifying. I needed to survive until August 15th, when my dorm room would become available. I needed to figure out transportation to the Bay Area, and somehow I needed to do it all while maintaining the 3.8 GPA required to keep my scholarship. The manager at Denny's, a middle-aged woman named Carol with kind eyes and tired feet, noticed me around day 3. I'd been ordering coffee and making it last for hours while using their Wi-Fi to research summer housing options and part-time jobs. When she approached my booth at 2 a.m., I was sure she was going to ask me to leave. "Honey," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, "You been here every night this week? Everything okay at home?" I could have lied, should have lied. But something about the way she asked, without judgment, without that pitying tone adults use when they think they're being helpful, made me tell her the truth. "My family kicked me out for getting into college," I said, and hearing the words out loud made them sound even more absurd. "I'm living in my car until my dorm opens in August." Carol was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into her own coffee cup. "What's your major gonna be?" "Business administration. I want to start my own company someday." She nodded slowly. "My daughter graduated from Sacramento State 5 years ago. Business degree. She's managing 3 restaurants now for a big chain, making more money than her father and I ever dreamed of. She looked at me directly. Your family's fools, sweetheart. But their foolishness doesn't have to be your limitation. That's when she offered me something that probably saved my life. A job. Not just any job, but the overnight shift at Denny's, 4 nights a week from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It paid $12 an hour plus tips, and more importantly, it meant I could sleep in my car during the day when it was safer and warmer, and spend my nights in a clean, well-lit place with unlimited coffee and bathroom access. I'll give you a trial week, Carol said. You prove you can handle the overnight rush and the drunk college kids who come in at 3 a.m., and we'll make it official. I proved it, not just because I needed the money, but because Carol was the first adult in months who looked at my situation and saw potential instead of failure. She didn't lecture me about family values or suggest I crawl back home with my tail between my legs. She saw a hardworking kid who needed a chance and decided to provide one. Working overnight at Denny's taught me things no business textbook ever could. I learned how to handle difficult customers with patience and professionalism. I learned how to manage inventory, handle cash deposits, and coordinate with suppliers. Most importantly, I learned that success isn't just about having big dreams. It's about executing small tasks consistently, even when you're exhausted and everything in your life feels uncertain. The drunk college kids Carol warned me about turned out to be some of my best customers. They were students from the local community college and Cal State Bakersfield, kids who understood the struggle of making every dollar count. When they found out I was heading to Berkeley in the fall, they started tipping me extra and spreading the word that the overnight waitress was one of them, someone who understood what it meant to work for your education instead of having it handed to you. One regular customer, a junior named Miguel who was studying engineering, became my unofficial mentor. He'd come in every Tuesday night around midnight, order the same thing, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and black coffee, and we'd talk about college life during the slow periods. Berkeley's gonna be different, he told me one night in July. Rich kids everywhere. Kids who've never worked a day in their lives, whose biggest stress is choosing between daddy's BMW or mommy's Mercedes for the weekend. They're not gonna understand. You? Good, I said, refilling his coffee. I'm not going there to make friends. I'm going there to get an education. Miguel laughed. You say that now. But college isn't just about classes, Jessica. It's about networking, about building relationships that'll help you later. You can't just keep your head down and grind through 4 years. You gotta learn how to play the game. He was right, though I didn't fully understand what he meant until I actually got to campus. The game he was talking about wasn't just academic, it was social, economic, and cultural. It was about understanding that some of your classmates had trust funds bigger than most people's annual salaries, while others, like me, were calculating whether they could afford both lunch and dinner in the same day. During those 2 months at Denny's, I saved every penny I could. After gas, car insurance, and basic necessities, I managed to put away $1,200. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Money I'd earned by being responsible, reliable, and professional even when customers were rude, or my car wouldn't start, or the loneliness. Felt like it might swallow me whole. The hardest part wasn't the work or the financial stress. It was the silence from home. Not once in those 63 days did my phone ring with Marcus or my mother checking to see if I was alive. No text messages asking how I was doing. No offers to compromise or find middle ground. The message was clear. I had chosen my path, and I was walking it alone. My younger stepbrother Tyler called exactly once, about 3 weeks after I left. He was drunk and calling from a party, but I was so grateful to hear a familiar voice that I almost cried. Right there in the Denny's kitchen. Jess, he slurred into the phone. Marcus is telling everyone you ran away to join some kind of college cult. Says you're going to come back pregnant and broke asking for money. Is that what you think? I asked. There was a long pause. I don't Know what to think. All I know is the house is weird without you. Mom's been crying a lot, but she won't admit it. And Marcus is acting like nothing happened. But he's drinking more beer than usual. Tyler, I need you to listen to me. I didn't run away. I was kicked out for wanting to better myself. There's a difference. I know, he said quietly. I miss having you around. You were the only one who ever helped me with homework. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. Tyler was only 15, still figuring out his own path, and I realized that my exile wasn't just affecting me. It was teaching him that dreams were dangerous, that wanting more than what your family provided was a betrayal worthy of abandonment. As August approached and my departure date grew closer, I started thinking about what success would actually look like. It wasn't enough to just graduate and get a good job. I needed to succeed spectacularly. I needed to build something so impressive, so undeniably valuable, that my family's rejection would be exposed for what it truly was, a catastrophic failure of judgment that cost them the most ambitious person they'd ever known. The night before I left for Berkeley, Carol threw me a small, going-away party during the overnight shift. Just me, her, and the 3 other waitresses who worked weekends. They pooled their money and bought me a professional-looking briefcase for my business classes. Every CEO needs a good briefcase, Carol said, hugging me tight. And I got a feeling you're going to need a big one someday to carry all those contracts you're going to be signing. I loaded my car that morning with everything I owned: my clothes, my laptop, my textbooks, and my new briefcase. As I drove past my childhood home one last time, I saw Marcus in the driveway working on his truck, the same truck that had been broken for 6 months. My mother was visible through the kitchen window, probably making coffee and getting ready. For another day of watching talk shows and scrolling through Facebook, they looked so small from my car window, so limited, so convinced that their narrow view of the world was the only one that mattered. I felt something I didn't expect as I drove away. Not anger or hurt, but pity. They had chosen fear over faith, limitation over possibility, and in doing so, they had lost the chance to be part of something extraordinary. The drive to Berkeley took 4 hours. 4 hours of California highway, of slowly leaving behind everything familiar and driving toward everything unknown. By the time I pulled into the campus parking lot and saw the towering buildings, the manicured lawns, and the students walking around with the casual confidence that comes from knowing you belong somewhere, I understood that I wasn't just starting college. I was starting a revolution. A quiet, determined, unstoppable revolution that would end with me holding the keys to their future the same way they had once held the keys to mine. Except when my turn came, I wouldn't be nearly as forgiving as they expected me to be. Berkeley was everything I expected and nothing I was prepared for. Within my first week on campus, I realized that my scholarship covered tuition and housing, but it didn't cover the invisible costs of fitting into a world where some students spent more on coffee in a month than I'd made working all summer at Denny's. My roommate, Madison Fitzgerald Wells, yes, she hyphenated her parents' already hyphenated last names, moved in with 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases and her mother's personal assistant helping to arrange her side of the room. While I was figuring out how to make my $12 desk lamp look intentional, Madison was installing a coffee machine that cost more than my car insurance. "Oh my God, you're so lucky," she said on our second day, watching me count out quarters to do laundry. "I wish I could live without caring about money. It must be so freeing to just not think about material things." She said it like poverty was a lifestyle choice, like I'd made some Zen decision to embrace minimalism instead of simply not having options. When I tried to explain that I wasn't choosing to live without money, I just didn't have any, she looked at me with the kind of confused sympathy people reserve for exotic animals at the zoo. "But your scholarship covers everything, right? So you're basically getting paid to go to school. That's amazing." Madison wasn't mean-spirited. just clueless in that particular way that comes from never having to consider the price of anything. She genuinely couldn't understand that full ride didn't mean unlimited funds, or that there's a difference between having your education paid for and having spending money for textbooks, school supplies, or the occasional meal that didn't come from the dining hall. The academic side of college was challenging but manageable. I'd always been good at school, and the work ethic I'd developed during my homeless summer served me well. But the social aspects were like navigating a foreign country where everyone spoke the same language, but used completely different cultural references. During my first business ethics class, Professor Williams asked us to discuss a case study about corporate responsibility. A student named Bradford Ashworth III, and yes, he made sure everyone knew about the third part, raised his hand and said, "My father's company faced a similar situation when they had to close the Cleveland plant. He always said the key is managing public perception while protecting shareholder value." The casual way he referenced his father's company, the assumption that everyone in the room would understand the complexities of corporate decision-making from personal experience, the complete lack of consideration for the actual workers who lost their jobs in Cleveland. It was like watching someone speak a language I was still learning. When Professor Williams called on me for my perspective, I said, "I think we should also consider the impact on the families whose livelihoods depend on these decisions. Corporate responsibility isn't just about shareholders, it's about the communities that companies operate in." Bradford turned around to look at me like I'd suggested we solve corporate problems with a group hug. "That's very idealistic," he said with a condescending smile. "But business is about making tough decisions based on economic reality, not feelings." After class, a few students approached me. Some seemed genuinely interested in my perspective, but others made it clear that they viewed my comments as evidence that I didn't understand how the real world works. It was ironic, considering that my real world had included sleeping in cars and working overnight shifts, while theirs had included trust funds and family connections. The isolation wasn't immediate. It built slowly, like water seeping through, a crack in a foundation. Small moments that accumulated into a larger understanding that I was operating in a different economic universe than most of my classmates. When study groups formed, they often involved expensive off-campus restaurants, where I couldn't afford to join. When internship opportunities were discussed, they frequently required unpaid positions in expensive cities, opportunities that were perfect for students whose parents could subsidize their living expenses, but impossible for someone like me, who needed to earn money to survive. The breaking point came during my third month on campus. I'd been carefully managing my finances, working part-time at the campus bookstore, and tutoring other students to earn spending money. My routine was sustainable but exhausting. Classes all morning, work in the afternoon, studying until late at night, repeat. Then my car broke down. Not just a minor repair, but a transmission failure that would cost $2,800 to fix. Money I absolutely did not have. The campus was walkable, but my job at the bookstore required me to occasionally drive to other locations, and without reliable transportation, I was at risk of losing the income I needed to buy textbooks and cover basic expenses. I called 3 different mechanics, hoping for a miracle, but they all quoted similar prices. I called my bank to ask about a small loan, but with no credit history and no cosigner, they politely declined. For the first time since leaving home, I felt truly stuck. That evening, I was sitting in my dorm room trying to figure out my options when Madison came in from dinner with her sorority sisters. She was complaining about her own crisis. Her parents had only given her $800 for her monthly allowance, instead of the usual $200 because they were concerned about her spending habits. "It's so unfair," she said, flopping dramatically onto her bed. "How am I supposed to survive on $800? That barely covers my skincare routine and coffee. I literally can't afford to go out this weekend." I looked at her, then at my laptop screen, where I'd been researching emergency financial aid options, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked, like a windshield that's been hit by a rock but is still holding together, waiting for the right pressure to shatter completely. "Madison," I said carefully, "my car just died. I need $2,800 to fix it. And I don't have $2,800. I don't have $800. I don't even have $80 extra right now. So maybe consider that your reduced allowance is still more than some people have for their entire monthly budget." She stared at me for a moment, then said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot that you're, actually poor. That must be so hard for you." Actually poor. Like poverty was a personality trait I'd developed, rather than a circumstance I was working to overcome. Like my financial situation was something that had happened to me, rather than something I was actively fighting against every single day. That night, I called Carol at Denny's. Not because I wanted to quit school and come back to Bakersfield, but because I needed to hear the voice of someone who understood that struggle wasn't a character flaw. "How you holding up, honey?" she asked, and I could hear the genuine concern in her voice. "It's harder than I expected," I admitted. "Not the academics, those are fine, but everything else, the social stuff, the money stuff, feeling like I'm always one emergency away from failing." "You know what your problem is?" Carol said, and I could almost see her stirring sugar into her coffee on the other end of the line. "You're trying to fit into their world instead of building your own. You think you gotta play by their rules, talk their language, pretend their way of doing things is the only way." "But I need to network," I said, repeating Miguel's advice from months earlier. "I need to build relationships." "Sure you do, but with the right people. Find the other kids who are working their asses off to be there. Find the professors who remember what it was like to struggle. Find the people who see your drive instead of just your bank account balance." She was right, but changing my approach was easier said than done. The university's social structure seemed designed around shared economic experiences I couldn't access. Study abroad programs, unpaid internships, expensive networking events, spring break trips that cost more than I made in 3 months. These weren't just social activities, they were career-building opportunities disguised as fun. I started paying closer attention to which students worked campus jobs, which ones bought used textbooks, which ones ate dining hall food for every meal instead of ordering delivery. There weren't many of us, but we existed. Scholarship kids, first-generation college students, international students managing tight budgets, graduate students supporting themselves through school. We found each other gradually, drawn together by shared understanding of what it meant to calculate the cost of everything, to make decisions based on necessity rather than preference. We formed our own study groups, our own support network, our own version of the college experience that didn't require family money or connections. But even as I built these relationships, even as I found my academic footing and started excelling, in my business courses, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fighting an uphill battle in a system designed for people whose biggest worry was choosing between vacation destinations. The worst part wasn't the financial stress or the social isolation. It was the growing realization that my family's prediction might actually come true. Not because I lacked ability or ambition, but because the game was rigged in ways I was only beginning to understand. Every day at Berkeley reminded me of the choice I'd made, the bridges I'd burned, the family support I'd traded for educational opportunity. And every day, I became more determined to prove that their narrow-minded view of success was not just wrong, but catastrophically short-sighted. They thought college was a waste of money. I was going to show them exactly how expensive their mistake would be. By the end of my freshman year, I had developed what I called survival mode, a carefully calculated approach to college life that involved saying yes to everything that could advance my career and no to everything that cost money. It was exhausting, but it was working. My GPA was 3.9, I had secured a competitive summer internship at a tech startup in San Francisco, and I'd managed to fix my car with money earned from tutoring Madison's sorority sisters through their business. Math requirements. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same people who looked at me with pity during social situations were paying me $25 an hour to explain concepts they couldn't grasp, despite having attended private schools that cost more per year than most people's salaries. Summer in San Francisco should have been a breakthrough. The internship at TechFlow Dynamics was prestigious, unpaid, but offered the kind of experience that could open doors. I found a shared room in a cramped apartment in Oakland with 3 other interns, splitting the $1,800 monthly rent 4 ways. It meant I had to work nights and weekends at a coffee shop in the Mission District to afford food and transportation. But I was finally getting real business experience. TechFlow was developing an app that connected small businesses with freelance marketing professionals. The concept was solid, but the execution was chaotic. The company was run by 2 Stanford MBA graduates, Connor Walsh and Ethan Kim, who had impressive credentials and family connections, but seemed to lack any practical understanding of how actual small businesses operated. During my second week, I was assigned to research potential client demographics. While Connor and Ethan focused on targeting boutique fitness studios and artisanal coffee shops in wealthy neighborhoods, I spent my off hours visiting small businesses in less affluent areas of Oakland and San Jose. What I discovered was a massive, untapped market of family-owned restaurants, auto repair shops, beauty salons, and retail stores that needed marketing help but couldn't afford the high-end consultants that TechFlow was originally designed to attract. I drafted a detailed proposal suggesting we expand our platform to include more affordable marketing packages, specifically designed for working-class business owners. I included market research, pricing strategies, and projected revenue models. It was 23 pages of carefully researched, professionally presented analysis that I'd worked on during my commute and lunch breaks for 3 weeks. Connor glanced at it during a team meeting and said, "Interesting perspective, Jessica, but we're focusing on the premium market. There's more money in high-end clients. But there are more potential clients in the middle and lower market segments," I replied. "The volume could offset the lower individual transaction values." Ethan nodded politely but dismissively. "Maybe that's something to explore in a future iteration. Right now, we need to establish ourselves with clients who can afford our services." That was it. 3 weeks of research dismissed in 30 seconds because it didn't align with their preconceived notions about where the money was. What frustrated me most wasn't the rejection. It was the certainty that they were wrong, and the growing understanding that being right didn't matter if you weren't in a position to act on your insights. The pattern continued throughout the summer. I would identify problems, propose solutions, and watch as my suggestions were politely acknowledged and promptly ignored. Meanwhile, Connor and Ethan spent company resources on expensive marketing campaigns targeting demographics that showed little interest in their services. By August, TechFlow was struggling to acquire customers. Their burn rate was unsustainable, and their investor meetings weren't going well. I had been keeping detailed notes on everything, not out of malice, but because I was genuinely trying to understand why smart, educated people were making such obviously poor decisions. The answer became clear during my final week when I overheard Connor on a phone call with his father, discussing the possibility of additional family funding to keep the company afloat, until they could figure out their market strategy. Ethan was having similar conversations with his relatives about potential investment opportunities. They weren't worried about failure because failure for them came with a safety net. They could afford to make expensive mistakes because someone would always be there to catch them. This wasn't entrepreneurship. It was an elaborate form of playing house with real money that wasn't really theirs. I returned to Berkeley for my sophomore year with a clearer understanding of how the business world actually worked, and it wasn't encouraging. Success seemed to depend less on merit and more on access to capital, connections, and second chances. The best ideas didn't always win, the best funded ideas did. My living situation had improved slightly. I'd moved into a shared apartment with 3 other scholarship students: Marcus Chen, a computer science major from Los Angeles, Aisha Patel, pre-med from Phoenix, and David Rodriguez, studying engineering from El Paso. We called ourselves the Broke Brigade and had developed our own support system based on shared groceries, carpooling to campus, and taking turns covering each other's shifts when emergencies arose. The contrast between our apartment and the lifestyle of my wealthier classmates became even more stark during sophomore year. Madison had moved into a luxury apartment complex near campus with two of her sorority sisters. Their rent was $3,200 per month, more than my entire semester's expenses. When I visited to return some books she'd left in our old dorm room, I was amazed by the granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and the view of the San Francisco Bay. "You should totally move in with us next year," Madison said, genuinely, meaning it. "There's a fourth bedroom, and it would be so fun to have you here." "How much would my share be?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be impossible. "Only $800 plus utilities. It's such a steal for this location. Only $800. More than I spent on food, transportation, books, and personal expenses combined." I smiled and said I'd think about it, but we both knew I couldn't afford to think about it seriously. The academic pressure was intensifying as well. Sophomore year business courses required more group projects, case study presentations, and networking events. These activities increasingly took place outside normal class hours and often involved expenses that weren't covered by my scholarship. The Business Leader Society, which was essentially required for anyone serious about a career in corporate management, had a $150 membership fee and expected members to attend monthly dinners at upscale restaurants where the average meal cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. When I applied for a fee waiver, I was told that financial hardship accommodations weren't available for optional extracurricular activities. Optional. As if networking with future CEOs and investment bankers was truly optional for someone who wanted to compete in their world after graduation. I found workarounds when I could. I volunteered to help with event planning for the Business Leaders Society, which gave me access to the networking opportunities without having to pay for membership or expensive meals. I attended free lectures and seminars whenever possible. I made connections with professors during office hours instead of at costly social events. But the constant calculations were wearing me down. Every opportunity came with a cost-benefit analysis. Every social invitation required financial planning. Every academic decision was filtered through the question of whether I could afford to participate. The breaking point came during the spring semester of my sophomore year. Professor Jennifer Martinez, who taught advanced corporate strategy, announced a mandatory study trip to New York City. Students would spend a week visiting major corporations, attending board meetings, and networking with Berkeley alumni working on Wall Street. The cost was $2,400 per student, covering airfare, hotel accommodations, meals, and transportation. Professor Martinez emphasized that this wasn't really optional. The experiences and connections from this trip were integral to the course, and students who didn't participate would be at a significant disadvantage for the final project. I stayed after class to discuss alternatives. Could I write additional research papers instead? Could I participate virtually in some of the meetings? Could I find a way to get to New York on my own and just meet up with the group? Professor Martinez was sympathetic but firm. "I understand your situation, Jessica, and I admire your dedication. But this is the reality of business education at this level. These experiences cost money. The connections we're making cost money. If you want to compete with students from Harvard and Wharton after graduation, you need the same caliber of experiences they're getting." She wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't offering any solutions. The unspoken message was clear: find the money, or accept that you'll be left behind. That night, I called my mother for the first time since leaving home 18 months earlier. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I was desperate enough to consider asking for help, even knowing what the answer would be. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Her voice was cautious, uncertain. "Jessica? Is everything okay?" "Hi, Mom, I'm fine. I needed to ask you something." There was a long pause. "Are you coming home? Did you finally realize that college thing isn't working out?" "No, I'm not coming home. I'm doing well in school. Really well. But I need help with something. And I thought maybe we don't have money to give you, if that's what you're asking. Marcus lost his job last month, and things are tight here too." Marcus lost his job. Part of me felt a flicker of concern, but a larger part felt vindicated. The man who had mocked my ambitions and called my education worthless was now unemployed while I was excelling at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "I wasn't asking for money." "Exactly, never mind, it was a stupid idea." "Jessica," my mother said, and for a moment her voice softened. "You know you can come home any time, right? Your room is still here. We could work things out." My room. The tiny space I'd shared with Tyler, in the house where my dreams had been, dismissed, and my ambitions had been treated as personal attacks on their lifestyle choices. "Thanks, Mom, but I'm where I need to be." After I hung up, I sat in my shared bedroom in our cramped apartment and made a decision. I couldn't afford the New York trip, but I could afford to be creative. If my classmates were going to New York to network with successful Berkeley alumni, I would research those same alumni and find ways to connect with them directly. I spent the next 3 days crafting personalized emails to 12 Berkeley graduates working in finance and consulting in New York. I introduced myself, explained my situation honestly, and asked if they would be willing to have a phone or video conversation about their career paths and advice for current students. 7 of them responded positively. 3 offered to have extended phone calls. 1, an investment banker named Sarah Chen, who had graduated 5 years earlier, was so impressed by my initiative that she offered to review my resume and provide introductions to colleagues who might be hiring interns. While my classmates were spending $2,400 to attend structured presentations, I was having genuine, substantive conversations with the same professionals they were meeting. By the time they returned from New York, I had secured a summer internship at a consulting firm in Los Angeles and had built relationships that would prove far more valuable than any group tour. Professor Martinez was stunned when I presented. My final project, which included detailed insights from my conversations with industry professionals and a comprehensive analysis of market trends I'd learned about through my independent networking efforts. "How did you manage to get such detailed access to these executives?" she asked after I'd finished my presentation. I said simply. I explained my situation honestly and asked for help. Most successful people remember what it was like to need guidance, and they're willing to share it if you approach them respectfully. The other students looked at me with a mixture of admiration and resentment. I had achieved better results than they had while spending nothing instead of thousands of dollars. But instead of learning from my approach, most of them seemed to view it as further evidence that I was somehow different from them, not necessarily in a positive way. That difference was becoming my superpower, even though it often felt like a burden. While they relied on family resources to solve problems, I had learned to be resourceful. While they networked through expensive events, I had learned to build relationships through genuine value and authentic communication. While they saw obstacles as reasons to spend more money, I saw them as opportunities to be creative. But I was also getting tired. Tired of always being the exception, the scholarship kid, the one who had to work twice as hard to achieve the same results. Tired of pretending that their casual comments about money didn't sting, that their assumptions about my background didn't hurt, that their oblivious privilege didn't make me want to scream sometimes. Most of all, I was tired of being grateful. Grateful for scholarships, grateful for opportunities, grateful for the chance to prove myself in a world that seemed designed to exclude people like me. I was ready to stop being grateful and start being powerful. But first, I had to finish my education and build the foundation that would make that power possible. Every slight, every obstacle, every moment of feeling like an outsider was fuel for the fire I was building. And that fire was going to burn brighter than anything my family could have imagined when they threw me out for daring to dream bigger than their limitations. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October of my junior year, right as I was walking out of my international business law class. I almost didn't answer because I was running late for my shift at the campus career center, but something made me glance at the screen. Tyler's name flashed across my phone, the first time he'd called me in over 2 years. Jess? His voice was different, older, strained. I need to tell you something. I ducked into an empty classroom, my stomach already tightening with dread. What's wrong? It's Mom. She's in the hospital. Heart attack. They don't know if she's going to make it. The world tilted sideways for a moment. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my mother, whatever anger and hurt had built up over the years of silence, she was still my mother. The woman who used to braid my hair before school, who taught me to ride a bike in the Walmart parking lot, who once stayed up all night with me when I had pneumonia in 3rd grade. When did this happen? Yesterday morning. Marcus didn't want to call you, said you made it clear you don't consider us family anymore. But I thought you should know. Marcus. Even in a crisis, he was making decisions about my life, controlling information, deciding whether I deserved to know that my mother was dying. Is she awake? Can she talk? Sometimes. She keeps asking for you, Jess. She says your name when she's conscious. My hands were shaking as I walked to my car. I had $347 in my checking account and a midterm exam the next day that was worth 40% of my grade in corporate finance. The drive to Bakersfield would take 4 hours, and I'd need gas money, hospital parking fees, and probably food. I'd also need to miss work, which meant losing 2 days of pay I couldn't afford to lose. But she was asking for me. The drive to Bakersfield was a blur of highway and memories I'd tried to bury. Every mile marker brought back another piece of my childhood. The good parts that I'd pushed aside in my anger over how it all ended. The way my mother used to sing along to the radio while we drove to the grocery store. How she'd let me help her bake cookies for school fundraisers, even though I usually made more of a mess than I helped. The pride in her voice when I brought home good report cards before college became a threat instead of a dream. Valley General Hospital smelled like disinfectant and floor wax, the same smell I remembered from when my grandmother had been sick. I found Tyler in the waiting room, looking older than his 19 years. He'd grown taller, broader, but his eyes still held that uncertain expression I remembered from when he was little and couldn't figure out his math homework. She's stable, he said, standing up to hug me. Doctor says the next 48 hours are critical, but her vitals are improving. Where's Marcus? Tyler's expression darkened. Getting coffee. He's been here since yesterday, but... Jess, you should... No. He's not happy you're here. He thinks you're going to upset Mom, stress her out when she needs to focus on getting better. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway holding a paper cup of coffee that smelled burnt, even from across the room. He looked older too, grayer, with new lines around his eyes. But when he saw me, his expression hardened into the same contemptuous mask I remembered from that night in the kitchen. Well, look who decided to show up, he said. The college girl, gracing us with her presence. Marcus, don't, Tyler said quietly. Not here. Not now. Don't what? Don't point out that she abandoned her family for 3 years and only comes back when someone's dying? Don't mention that your mother cried herself to sleep for months after Princess Jessica decided she was too good for us? The anger rose in my chest like a physical thing, hot and sharp. But I looked at Tyler's pleading expression and forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about Marcus or old grievances. This was about my mother. I'm here now. I said simply. Can I see her? The ICU was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines and the soft whisper of ventilators. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that made my chest tight. Her face was pale, and there were tubes and wires everywhere, but her eyes opened when I sat down beside her bed. Jessica? Her voice was barely a whisper. You came. Of course I came, Mom. She tried to smile, but it was weak, exhausted. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry, baby. I was wrong. About everything. I took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. Her skin was cool, papery. Don't worry about that now. Just focus on getting better. No, I need to say this. While I can. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had. You were right to go to college. You were right to want more. I was scared. And I let Marcus convince me that you were rejecting us instead of just growing. The tears came then. 3 years worth of hurt and anger and love all tangled together. I never wanted to reject you, Mom. I just wanted to build something. I wanted to make you proud. I am proud. So proud. Tyler tells me you're doing amazing things at that school. Top of your class, internships, all of it. She paused, breathing heavily. I want to know everything. Tell me about your life. So I did. For the next hour, I told her about Berkeley, about my classes and my friends in the Broke Brigade. I told her about my internships, about the businesses I was studying, about my plans to start my own company someday. I told her about the apartment I shared and the professors who had become mentors, and the way I'd learned to navigate a world that was nothing like Bakersfield. She listened to everything, asking questions, smiling when I described my successes, looking proud in a way I hadn't seen since I was little. For that hour, we weren't the mother and daughter who had been torn apart by fear and stubbornness. We were just Jessica and Linda, reconnecting across years of silence. When she got tired and needed to rest, I went back to the waiting room. Marcus was gone, but Tyler was still there, now joined by our Aunt Carol, my mother's sister who lived in Fresno. How is she? Aunt Carol asked, hugging me tight. Tyler told me you drove down from Berkeley. That's a good girl. Family is family, no matter what's happened. We talked for a while about my mother's condition, about the treatment plan, about what the doctors were saying. Then Tyler pulled me aside. Jess, there's something else you need to know. The medical bills, they're going to be huge. Mom doesn't have good insurance through her job at the grocery store, and Marcus lost his job a few months back. They're already behind on the house payments. The house? The same house where I'd been told to leave if I didn't like living with. Family. The house they'd acted like belonged to them by right, not mortgage payments. How behind? 3 months, maybe 4. Marcus has been trying to find work, but... Tyler shrugged helplessly. You know how he is. Thinks he's too good for certain jobs, but doesn't have the skills for better ones. I did some quick mental math. The house payment was probably around $1,800 a month, which meant they owed at least $400, maybe more. Add medical bills on top of that, and they were looking at financial disaster. What's going to happen? I don't know. Marcus keeps saying, something will work out. But I think he's hoping Mom dies so he can collect life insurance money. The casual way Tyler said it made my blood run cold. He said that? Not exactly, but he's been asking a lot of questions about her policy. And he keeps talking about how expensive it's going to be to keep her alive if she needs long-term care. I spent the night in the hospital waiting room, dozing in an uncomfortable chair and checking on my mother every few hours when the nurses allowed visitors. By morning, her condition had stabilized enough for the doctors to feel cautiously optimistic. But they warned that her recovery would be long and expensive. That's when Marcus made his proposal. He found me in the cafeteria, where I was trying to make a cup of coffee and a stale muffin stretch as far as possible. He sat down across from me with his own coffee and what looked like a prepared speech. Look, Jessica, I know we've had our differences, but we need to be practical here. Your mother's going to need care, probably for months. The medical bills are going to be enormous, and we can't afford them. I waited, knowing there was more coming. But you've got your fancy college education, your internships, all those connections. You could help us out, just temporarily until we get back on our feet. Help you out how? Money. Whatever you can spare. I know you scholarship kids get stipends and stuff, and maybe you could talk to some of your rich friends, see if anyone's parents need tax write-offs or charity cases. The audacity was breathtaking. 3 years of silence, 3 years of treating me like I'd betrayed the family, and now he wanted me to be their salvation. Now my education was useful. Now my connections had value. Now I was family again because they needed something from me. Marcus, I said carefully, I'm a college student. I work part-time jobs to afford food and textbooks. I don't have money to spare, and my friends aren't rich benefactors looking for charity cases. His expression darkened. So that's it? You're just going to let your mother suffer because you're too selfish to help? I'm not the one who's selfish here. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like an ungrateful little bitch who forgot where she came from the minute she got a taste of the good life. That's when something inside me finally snapped. Not cracked, like it had so many times before, but completely shattered. 3 years of biting my tongue, of trying to be the bigger person, of carrying guilt for choices that were never really mine to begin with. All of it ended in that moment. I stood up slowly, looking down at Marcus with all the contempt I'd been swallowing for years. You want to know what's selfish, Marcus? Kicking out your daughter for having ambitions? Spending 3 years bad-mouthing her to everyone who'll listen, then expecting her to save you when your own failures catch up with you. You want to know what's ungrateful? Taking the person who was trying to build something meaningful and treating her like she was the problem. Your mother. My mother is lying in a hospital bed partly because of the stress you've put this family through. Your gambling, your drinking, your refusal to take responsibility for anything. You want money? Get a job. Any job. Stop thinking you're too good for honest work and start acting like the head of household you claim to be. Marcus's face went purple with rage. You little... I'm not finished. My voice was calm now, icy. You threw me out for going to college. You called my education a waste of money. You said I'd come crawling back, broke and pregnant and begging for help. Well, guess what? I'm not broke. I'm not begging. And I'm definitely not crawling back to people who made it clear I wasn't welcome. I pulled out my wallet and placed a $20 bill on the table. That's for the coffee. It's more than you deserve, but I'm not my mother's daughter for nothing. As I walked away, Marcus called after me, his voice loud enough to turn heads throughout the cafeteria. You walk away now and don't ever come back. You hear me? You're not family anymore. I stopped at the doorway and looked back at him one last time. You're right, Marcus. I'm not family anymore, but neither are you. You're just a man who married my mother and spent years trying to make her ashamed of the daughter she should have been proud of. The difference is, when this is all over, I'll still be successful. You'll still be you. The drive back to Berkeley was the longest 4 hours of my life, not because of traffic or weather, but because I spent every mile processing what had just happened. I'd finally said everything I'd been holding back for 3 years, but instead of feeling vindicated, I felt empty. My mother was going to recover. The doctors had assured me before I left. But she was going to face months of medical bills, rehabilitation costs, and financial uncertainty with a man who saw her near-death experience as an opportunity to guilt-trip the daughter he'd spent years alienating. By the time I reached the Bay Area, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let Marcus destroy my mother the way he'd tried to destroy me. But I wasn't going to save her through charity or begging or playing the grateful scholarship kid who owed her family everything. I was going to save her by becoming powerful enough to control the situation completely. And Marcus, who thought my education was worthless, was about to learn exactly what that education could buy. The Monday after my confrontation with Marcus, I walked into my advanced financial management class with a clarity of purpose I'd never felt before. Professor Rachel Kim was discussing leveraged buyouts and acquisition strategies, topics that had seemed abstract just days earlier, but now felt like tools I desperately needed to understand. After class, I approached Professor Kim during her office hours. She was known for being tough but fair, a former Goldman Sachs analyst who had left Wall Street to teach after making enough money to retire comfortably at 35. Professor Kim, I have a hypothetical situation I'd like to discuss. For a class project, I added, though we both knew this wasn't entirely academic. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity she brought to analyzing balance sheets. I'm listening. Let's say someone wanted to acquire distressed residential real estate, property that's facing foreclosure, where the current owners have significant equity but are unable to make payments due to financial hardship. What would be the most effective approach? Professor Kim raised an eyebrow. That's a very specific, hypothetical, Jessica. Are we talking about a family situation? I hesitated, then decided honesty would serve me better than pretense. My mother's house is 3 months behind on payments. The current owner, my stepfather, has no income and no prospects. The property is worth about $180,000, but they owe roughly $95,000 on the mortgage. I want to buy it before it goes into foreclosure. Do you have $95,000? No. But I have good credit, a strong academic record, and I graduate in 8 months with multiple job offers lined up. I also have detailed financial projections showing I can afford the payments once I start working full-time. Professor Kim was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her desk. What you're describing isn't just a real estate transaction. Jessica, it's a family intervention with legal and emotional complications. Are you prepared for that? More prepared than I am to watch my mother lose her home because she married a man who thinks pride is more valuable than pragmatism. All right, let's talk strategy. For the next hour, Professor Kim walked me through the process of acquiring distressed properties. We discussed bridge loans, owner financing, assumption of existing mortgages, and the legal requirements for transferring property between family members. By the time I left her office, I had a clear roadmap and 3 referrals: a real estate attorney, a mortgage broker who specialized in non-traditional lending, and a private investor who might be willing to provide short-term financing for the right opportunity. That evening, I called Tyler from my apartment. I need you to get me some information without Marcus knowing. What kind of information? The exact amount owed on the house, the name of the mortgage company, how many payments they've missed, and what the foreclosure timeline looks like. Also, I need to know if Mom has any other debts that could complicate things. Tyler was quiet for a moment. Jess, what are you planning? I'm planning to save Mom's house, but I need you to trust me and not tell Marcus anything yet. He's going to be pissed when he finds out. Tyler, Marcus has had 3 years to figure out how to keep a roof over his own head. He failed. Now it's my turn to try. The information Tyler gathered was both better and worse than I'd expected. They owed $97,500 on the mortgage, but there were also $8,000 in medical bills from my mother's hospital stay, $3,200 in credit card debt, and $1,800 in past due utilities. The total debt load was manageable, but it would require careful planning and precise timing. My first meeting was with Jennifer Walsh, the real estate attorney Professor Kim had recommended. Her office in downtown Oakland was small but professional, with law books lining the walls and certificates proving her expertise in property law. Your situation is complicated but not impossible, she said after I'd explained everything. The key is acting before the foreclosure process goes too far. Once the bank files formal foreclosure papers, your options become much more limited. How long do we have? based on what you've told me, probably 6 to 8 weeks before they file. California law requires multiple notices and waiting periods, so there's time to act if you move quickly. Jennifer outlined 3 possible approaches. The cleanest would be for Marcus to voluntarily deed the house to me in exchange for my assumption of the mortgage and other debts. The most complicated would involve forcing a sale through legal action, which could take months and cost thousands in attorney fees. The middle option was to negotiate with the bank directly, offering to bring the mortgage current in exchange for allowing me to assume the loan. Which approach do you recommend? Honestly, talk to your stepfather first. If he's rational and truly wants what's best for your mother, he might be willing to work with you. If not, she shrugged, we'll pursue other options. My next stop was Pacific Coast Mortgage Solutions, where I met with David Chen, the broker. Professor Kim had suggested. David specialized in helping young professionals with limited credit history secure financing for real estate investments. Your income potential is strong, he said, reviewing my transcript, internship records, and job offer letters. 3 major consulting firms have made you offers, with starting salaries between $85,000 and $95,000. That's impressive for a new graduate. The problem is timing. I need financing now, but I won't start earning that salary until after graduation. There are options: bridge loans, family assistance programs, private investor partnerships. The question is, how much risk you're willing to take, and what kind of interest rates you can accept. David presented several scenarios. The most conservative involved a private investor who would front the money for 6 months at 12% interest, allowing me to refinance with a traditional mortgage once I started my job. The riskiest involved assuming the existing mortgage immediately and using credit cards to cover the catch-up payments, then consolidating everything once I had steady income. What would you do in my situation? I asked. David smiled. I'd probably go with the private investor option. It's more expensive short-term, but it gives you the most flexibility and the lowest chance of everything falling apart if your job. Situation changes. The private investor was Elizabeth Santos, a Berkeley alumna who had made her fortune in tech and now invested in real estate and small businesses. Her office in San Francisco overlooked the Bay, and she had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from making smart decisions consistently over many years. Professor Kim tells me you're trying to save your family's house, she said, after I'd presented my proposal. That's admirable, but I need to understand the business case. Why is this a good investment for me? I had prepared for this question extensively. The property is worth $180,000 in current market conditions. The total debt load is approximately $110,000? You'd be lending me $115,000 for 6 months at 12% annual interest, secured by the property itself. Even if something goes wrong with my job situation, you'd still have a $70,000 equity cushion. And if your family doesn't cooperate with the transfer, then you foreclose on a property worth $65,000 more than what you paid for it. Either way, you win. Elizabeth studied my financial projections, my job offers, and my academic record. You've done your homework. Most people your age couldn't put together this kind of analysis. Most people my age haven't had to. She laughed. Fair point. I'll fund your deal, Jessica, but with conditions. You sign personally for the loan, not just the property. If anything goes wrong, you're responsible for the full amount. And I want monthly updates on your progress until everything is resolved. Agreed. With the financing secured, I had one more preparation to make before approaching Marcus. I contacted the mortgage company directly, explaining that I was the homeowner's daughter and wanted to discuss options for bringing the account current. The customer service representative, Maria Rodriguez, was surprisingly helpful. If someone brings us $12,400, that's the past due amount plus fees, we can reinstate the loan immediately. The new borrower would need to qualify for assumption, but that's usually just a credit check and income verification. What if The current borrower voluntarily transfers the property before the assumption is complete. As long as the payments become current, we don't typically interfere with transfers between family members. We just want the loan to perform. Everything was in place. The financing, the legal framework, the bank's cooperation. All I needed now was Marcus's signature on a quitclaim deed. Based on our confrontation at the hospital, I knew this wouldn't be a simple conversation. I drove to Bakersfield on a Friday afternoon, arriving just as Marcus was coming home from another unsuccessful job interview. He was wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit well and had the defeated expression of a man whose pride was slowly being worn away by reality. "What are you doing here?" he asked when he saw me getting out of my car. "I'm here to make you an offer." Tyler opened the front door before Marcus could respond. "Jess, I didn't know you were coming down. Is Mom home?" "She's resting. The physical therapy is exhausting, but she's getting stronger." I looked at Marcus, who was standing in the driveway like he was guarding the entrance to his castle. "We need to talk, all three of us." The living room looked exactly the same as it had 3 years earlier, except shabbier. The carpet was more stained, the furniture more worn, and there was a mustiness in the air that suggested financial stress had led to deferred maintenance on everything from cleaning supplies to home repairs. My mother was sitting on the couch, with an oxygen tank beside her, looking frail but alert. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine joy. "Jessica, you came back." "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Better every day. Tyler told me you've been asking about the house situation. I'm so sorry you have to worry about this on top of everything else." Marcus settled into his recliner with obvious reluctance. "She's not worried about anything. She's here to gloat, to rub our faces in how successful she is while we're struggling." I pulled out a folder containing the legal documents Jennifer had prepared, along with financial statements showing exactly how I plan to resolve their crisis. "Actually, Marcus, I'm here to save your house." For the next 30 minutes, I laid out my proposal in detail. I would pay off all their debts, the mortgage, medical bills, credit cards, utilities, in exchange for a quitclaim deed transferring ownership to me. They could continue living in the house rent-free for 6 months while my mother recovered, after which we'd discuss long-term arrangements. "You want us to just give you the house?" Marcus asked, his voice rising. "For paying some bills that we could handle ourselves if we had a little more time." "Marcus, you're 4 months behind on the mortgage. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. You don't have more time." "We could catch up. I've got some leads on jobs, and Linda's going back to work as soon as the doctor clears her." I looked at my mother, who was staring at the oxygen tank beside her chair. "Mom, what does the doctor say about you going back to work?" He says it might be a while," she admitted quietly. "The heart damage was significant. I might not be able to do physical work for several months." Marcus shot her a sharp look. "You didn't tell me that?" "I didn't want to worry you more than you already are." I pulled out the foreclosure notice Tyler had found hidden in Marcus's desk drawer. "This says you have 3 weeks before the bank files formal foreclosure papers. Once that happens, even if you get a job tomorrow, it will be too late to save the house through normal means." The room was quiet, except for the soft hiss of my mother's oxygen tank. Tyler was reading through my proposal, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement as he realized the scope of what I was offering. "Jess, this is incredible. You're going to pay off everything? How do you have this kind of money?" "I don't have it yet, but I've arranged financing based on my future earnings. It's complicated, but it's all legal and properly structured." Marcus was shaking his head. "There's got to be a catch. You don't just save people out of the goodness of your heart. What do you really want?" I looked at him directly, letting all the anger and hurt from the past 3 years show in my expression. "What I want, Marcus, is for my mother to have a secure place to live while she recovers from a heart attack. What I want is for her to not lose her home because the man she married was too proud to take a job at Walmart when the bills needed paying. What I want is to never again have to listen to you tell my family that my education was worthless while you beg me to use that education to save you from the consequences of your own failures. So this is about revenge. No, Marcus. This is about results. You've had 3 years to prove that your way works better than mine. Your way led to foreclosure, medical debt, and a sick woman worrying about losing her home. My way leads to everyone keeping their house and their dignity. I stood up and placed the quitclaim deed on the coffee table in front of him. You have until Sunday to decide. Sign this, and all your debts disappear. Don't sign it, and in 3 weeks you'll be explaining to my mother why you let the bank take her home rather than accept help from the daughter you threw away. As I reached the door, Marcus called after me. And if we sign, what happens then? You're our landlord for the rest of our lives? I turned back to face him one last time. Then, Marcus, you get to learn what it feels like when someone with power chooses to be generous instead of vindictive. Too bad you never gave me that same courtesy. Saturday passed in complete silence. No calls, no texts, no indication of what Marcus was thinking or whether he was even considering my offer. I spent the day in my apartment in Berkeley, trying to focus on my senior thesis but constantly checking my phone for updates from Tyler. Sunday morning, my phone finally rang at 8:47 a.m. Tyler's voice was exhausted, like he'd been awake all night. He signed it, Tyler said without preamble. Marcus signed the papers this morning. But Jess, it's bad here. Really bad. What happened? They've been fighting since you left. Mom keeps saying she's proud of you and that you're doing something. Amazing for the family. Marcus keeps saying you're manipulating her, that you're taking advantage of her being sick to steal their house. I could hear voices in the background, my mother's weak protests and Marcus's angry responses. Where is he now? Drinking beer in the garage. He's been out there since 6 a.m., just sitting in his chair, drinking and muttering about ungrateful kids. And college bitches who think they're better than everyone? Tyler paused, and I heard a door close on his end. Jess, I need to tell you something else. When Marcus signed the papers, he said something that scared me. What? He said. Fine, the little princess wants to play house? Let's see how she likes. Being responsible for everything when it all falls apart. And then he smiled, but not in a good way, like he was planning something. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of something? I don't know, but he's been making phone calls all morning. And he keeps asking me questions about your school, your job offers, where you're living now. It feels like he's gathering information for some reason. I thanked Tyler and immediately called Jennifer Walsh, my attorney. Even though it was Sunday, she answered on the second ring. Jessica? I wasn't expecting to hear from you until Monday. The papers are signed. Marcus agreed to the transfer, but I think there might be complications. I explained Tyler's concerns about Marcus's behavior and his cryptic comments about things falling apart. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Jessica, I need you to listen carefully. Once those papers are filed and the transfer is complete, you'll own that house and all the legal responsibilities that come with it. If Marcus is planning some kind of sabotage or retaliation, you need to be prepared. What kind of sabotage? Property damage, interfering with your credit, spreading false information to your future employers. There are dozens of ways an angry person can make life difficult for someone who's just starting their career. Advice is to move quickly and professionally. Get the paperwork filed immediately, transfer the utilities to your name, and document everything. Monday morning, I drove the signed documents to the county recorder's office myself. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, processed the quitclaim deed with the efficiency of someone who'd seen every possible family drama play out through real estate transactions. Transfer between family members, she noted, stamping the document. These usually go smooth, but sometimes they get messy. You might want to change the locks, just in case. By Wednesday, I owned my childhood home. The mortgage company had accepted my assumption of the loan. Elizabeth Santos had transferred the funds to cover all outstanding debts, and I was officially a property owner at 22 years old. The feeling should have been triumphant, but instead, it felt surreal and vaguely ominous. Thursday evening, Tyler called with an update that confirmed my worst fears. "Marcus is gone," he said. "He packed his truck this morning and left. Didn't say where he was going or when he'd be back. Just told Mom that he wasn't going to stick around and watch her daughter turn him into a charity case." "How is Mom taking?" She's devastated. She keeps blaming herself, saying she drove him away by not defending him enough. But Jess, there's something else. After Marcus left, I found some papers in his room. Bills and letters he'd been hiding from Mom. What kind of bills? Gambling debts. He owes money to some guy named Paulie who runs card games behind the casino. A lot of money. Like $15,000, a lot of money. My stomach dropped. "Tyler, are you sure? How do you know these are real?" "Because Paulie called the house an hour ago, looking for Marcus. When I told him Marcus wasn't here, he started asking about the house, about who owns it now, about whether the new owner would be responsible for Marcus's obligations. I hung up on him, but he said he'd be calling back." This was exactly the kind of complication Jennifer had warned me about. Marcus hadn't just been unemployed and financially irresponsible, he'd been actively making their situation worse through gambling. And now that he was gone, his creditors were looking at the house as a potential source of recovery. I called Jennifer immediately. "Gambling debts aren't typically secured by real estate unless there was a specific lien filed," she explained. "But if these are illegal gambling operations, they might not be concerned with legal niceties. You need to make it very clear that you purchased the house legitimately and that you're not responsible for Marcus's personal debts. What if they don't accept that explanation? Then we call the police. Threatening a homeowner for someone else's gambling debts is extortion, and it's illegal regardless of whether the gambling was legal." Friday morning brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. I was at my apartment in Berkeley, preparing for my final round of interviews with McKinsey & Company, when Tyler called in a panic. "Jess, you need to get down here right now. These guys came to the house looking for Marcus. When Mom told them he wasn't here, they started asking about you. They know your name, they know you go to Berkeley, and they know you just bought the house." "What guys? The gambling creditors?" "I think so. 2 of them. Big guys with tattoos. They weren't threatening or anything, but they made it real clear that they expect someone to pay what Marcus owes. They said they'd be back tomorrow to discuss payment arrangements with the new homeowner." I was already reaching for my car keys. "Tyler, listen to me. Call the police and file a report about harassment. Tell them exactly what these men said. Then call Jennifer Walsh. I'll text you her number. She needs to know what's happening." "Are you coming down?" "I'm leaving Berkeley right now, but Tyler, don't let Mom blame herself for this. Marcus created this mess long before I ever got involved." The drive to Bakersfield was the longest 2.5 hours of my life. My phone kept ringing with updates. Tyler reporting that the police had taken his statement, but said they couldn't do much unless the men made specific threats. Jennifer calling to say she was researching whether there were any liens or claims against the property that hadn't shown up in the title search. My mother, weak and confused, asking Tyler to call me because she was worried I'd be angry about bringing more problems. When I arrived at the house, I found my mother sitting on the couch with her oxygen tank, looking frailer than she had at the hospital. Tyler was pacing the living room like a caged animal, and there was a tension in the air that made my skin crawl. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, sitting beside my mother and taking her hand. Tyler recounted the visit in detail. 2 men, mid-30s, had knocked on the door around 10 a.m. When my mother answered, they'd been polite but firm. They explained that Marcus owed money from poker games, that he'd been dodging their calls, and that they needed to speak with whoever was now responsible for the property. They knew way too much about our situation, Tyler said. They knew Marcus had lost his job. They knew about Mom's heart attack, and they knew you'd just bought the house. Someone's been feeding them information. Marcus, I said simply. He's probably told them everything, trying to make this my problem instead of his. My mother squeezed my hand. Jessica, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what Marcus said would happen, that your success would just bring more problems for everyone. I looked at her, this woman who had raised me and loved me, and then let a weak man convince her to throw me away, and felt a surge of protective anger that had nothing to do with property or money or revenge. Mom, listen to me. Marcus didn't predict this would happen. Marcus caused this to happen. He gambled away money you couldn't afford to lose, then abandoned you when the consequences caught up with him. This isn't about my success bringing problems. This is about his failures creating problems that I'm now in a position to solve. Saturday morning, the men returned. But this time, they weren't talking to my frightened mother and teenage stepbrother. They were talking to me, and I was ready for them. I met them on the front porch, with Jennifer Walsh on speakerphone, and Tyler recording the conversation on his phone from inside the house. The men were exactly as Tyler had described, intimidating in size but trying to maintain a veneer of respectability. You must be Jessica, the taller one said. I'm Polly. We need to discuss your stepfather's debt situation. There's nothing to discuss, I replied calmly. Marcus Martinez doesn't live here anymore, and I'm not responsible for his gambling debts. Well, see, that's where it gets complicated, Polly said, his tone remaining conversational, but his eyes growing colder. Marcus told us that his family would take care of his obligations. Said his stepdaughter was some kind of college hotshot who just bought the family house. Smart girl who'd understand that debts don't just disappear when someone changes addresses. Jennifer's voice came through my phone speaker, clear and authoritative. This is attorney Jennifer Walsh representing Ms. Martinez. What you're describing constitutes harassment and attempted extortion. Ms. Martinez has no legal obligation to pay gambling debts incurred by a former resident of her property, Ollie. Looked at my phone with amusement. Attorney, huh? That's fancy, but this isn't about legal obligations, sweetheart. This is about family obligations. About doing right by people who trusted Marcus with their money. If you trusted Marcus with your money, I said, then you made a poor business decision. That's not my problem or my family's problem. If you want to collect from Marcus, you need to find Marcus. The second man, who hadn't spoken yet, stepped closer. Maybe you don't understand how this works, college girl. When someone welshes on a debt, the responsibility passes to their family. That's just how things are done. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone and opening the voice recorder app, that's exactly how extortion works. And since you're now threatening me on my own property, in front of witnesses, with an attorney listening, you've just committed several felonies. Polly held up his hands in mock surrender. Whoa, nobody's threatening anybody here. We're just having a conversation about Marcus's responsibilities and hoping to work something out with his family. The conversation is over, I said firmly. If you return to this property for any reason, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. If you contact my family again about Marcus's debts, I'll file harassment charges. And if you think you can intimidate a woman whose education you've consistently underestimated, you're about to learn just how expensive that mistake can be. Jennifer's voice came through the speaker again. Gentlemen, I'm recording this conversation as well. Ms. Martinez has made her position clear. Any further contact with her or her family regarding Mr. Martinez's gambling debts will result in criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. The two men exchanged glances, clearly not used to encountering this level of legal resistance to their collection. Methods. After a moment, Polly shrugged. Your choice, college girl. But Marcus better surface soon because this debt isn't going away. And if he doesn't pay up, we might have to get creative about other ways to collect. You do that, I said. And while you're being creative, I'll be filing police reports, restraining orders, and civil suits that will cost you more than Marcus could ever owe you. I've got excellent lawyers, unlimited time to pursue legal remedies, and absolutely no patience for people who think they can solve their business problems by intimidating my family. After they left, I sat on the porch with my mother and Tyler, feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I was the one with power instead of the one reacting to other people's choices. "Is it over?" my mother asked quietly. "The gambling debt part is over," I said. "Those guys won't be back. But Mom, I need you to understand something. This is what Marcus brought into your life. This is what his traditional values and his pride and his refusal to accept help when it was offered cost you. If I hadn't bought this house, if I hadn't been in a position to solve these problems, you could have lost everything." She nodded slowly, tears running down her cheeks. "I know, baby. I know. I should have listened to you years ago. I should have been proud instead of scared when you wanted to go to college." "You should have," I agreed. "But we can't change the past. We can only decide what happens next." What happened next was going to be entirely up to me. Marcus was gone, his debts were his own problem, and the house was secure. My mother was getting stronger every day. Tyler was starting to talk about his own college plans, and I was about to graduate from Berkeley with job offers that would set me up for life. The daughter they'd thrown away for wanting an education had just used that education to save them from the consequences of the choices they'd made in her absence. The irony was so complete it was almost poetic, but I wasn't done yet. There was one more conversation I needed to have, one more point I needed to make. And Marcus, wherever he was hiding, was about to learn that running away from his problems had only made them my opportunities. The morning after the gambling creditors left, I woke up in my childhood bedroom for the first time in 3 years. I'd decided to stay in Bakersfield for a few days to make sure there were no further complications and to help my mother process everything that had happened. But lying in that twin bed, staring at the ceiling I'd memorized as a teenager, I felt like I was inhabiting 2 different versions of myself simultaneously. 3 years ago, I'd left this room as a homeless 17-year-old with nothing but determination and a torn acceptance letter. Now I was back as a college graduate with a 6-figure job offer and enough financial leverage to solve my family's crisis with a phone call. The transformation should have felt triumphant, but instead, it felt surreal and strangely hollow. My phone buzzed with a text from my McKinsey recruiter. "Final paperwork signed. Welcome to the team. Start date confirmed for July 15th. Can't wait to see what you accomplish here." I stared at that message for a long time. In 6 weeks, I'd be sitting in a Manhattan office, analyzing corporate strategies and advising Fortune 500 executives on business decisions that affected thousands of jobs. The girl who'd been told she was too big for her britches was about to become someone who could influence billion-dollar companies. But first, I had to finish cleaning up the mess Marcus had left behind. Tyler knocked on my door around 8 a.m. "Mom's making breakfast," he said. "Real breakfast, not just cereal and coffee. I think she's trying to celebrate something, but she won't say what." In the kitchen, my mother was humming while scrambling eggs, something I hadn't heard her do since before Marcus moved in. She looked stronger than she had in months, more like the woman I remembered from my childhood before financial stress and emotional manipulation had worn her down. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, hugging me tight. I slept better last night than I have in years. No nightmares about losing the house. No panic attacks about money. For the first time since the heart attack, I feel like I can actually breathe. Over breakfast, we talked about practical matters. I explained the mortgage assumption process, walked her through the new payment schedule, and made sure she understood that the house was now legally mine, but would always be her home. Tyler peppered me with questions about college, about my job, about how I'd managed to put together such a complex financial arrangement so quickly. "I still don't understand how you knew how to do all this," he said. "I mean, you're 22. How do you know about bridge loans and private investors and legal contracts? I learned, I said simply. When you don't have family money to fall back on, you learn fast. Every class I took, every internship I completed, every connection I made, I approached it like my survival depended on understanding how the system actually works. But where did you get the confidence to think you could pull this off? Thought about that question for a moment. I got it from being underestimated. When people tell you that you can't do something, you have two choices: believe them or prove them wrong. I chose to prove them wrong so many times that eventually, I stopped doubting myself. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a familiar voice made my stomach clench. "Jessica, this is Marcus." My mother and Tyler both looked up from their conversation, sensing the tension in my expression. "Marcus, where are you calling from?" "I'm in Fresno, staying with my cousin Dave. Look, I heard about what happened with Paulie and his guys. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I never meant for my problems to affect your mother. Your problems became Mom's problems the minute you started gambling with money you couldn't afford to lose. They became my problems when you abandoned her during a medical crisis. I know, I screwed up. But Jessica, I'm calling because I want to make things right. I found steady work here in Fresno, construction, good pay, union benefits. I can start sending money to help with the house payments." I almost laughed. "Marcus, I bought the house. The mortgage is in my name now. Mom doesn't need your help with payments." There was a long silence. "You bought it? How the hell did you buy a house? You're a college student." "I'm a college graduate with a job at McKinsey & Company starting next month. Turns out that worthless piece of paper you threw in the trash can was actually worth quite a lot." McKinsey. He was quiet for a moment, probably trying to process that the daughter he'd mocked for her educational ambitions was now working for one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the world. "Look, I'm happy for you. I really am. But that doesn't change the fact that Linda is my wife and that house is my home too." "Actually, Marcus, it changes everything. Mom is recovering from a heart attack that was probably triggered by the financial stress you created. The house is legally mine now. And you forfeited any claim to being part of this family when you chose gambling debts over family responsibility. You can't just cut me out. I've been with your mother for 5 years. And in those 5 years, what did you contribute? You didn't pay the mortgage. You didn't cover the utilities. You didn't even manage to keep a steady job. The only thing you contributed was stress, debt, and a constant stream of criticism for anyone who tried to improve their situation." My mother was watching this conversation with a strange expression. Not sadness or longing, but something closer to relief, mixed with curiosity. Like she was interested to see what I would say, but not emotionally invested in the outcome. "I want to come home," Marcus said. And for the first time in our conversation, his voice cracked with genuine emotion. "I want to work things out with Linda. I want us to be a family again." "Marcus, you had 3 years to show Mom that you valued her more than your pride. You had countless opportunities to demonstrate that you were willing to work for your family instead of just expecting them to work for you. You failed every single test." "People change, Jessica. I've changed." "Have you?" "Because you still haven't taken responsibility for the gambling debts that forced me to deal with loan sharks in my own driveway. You still haven't acknowledged that. Your financial irresponsibility is what put Mom's health at risk. You're still acting like this is about my attitude problem instead of your behavior pattern." I handed the phone to my mother. "He wants to talk to you. But Mom, remember, you don't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not a second chance, not even a conversation if you don't want to have one." My mother took the phone with trembling hands. "Marcus?" "Yes, I heard what Jessica said. No, I don't think she's being unreasonable. Because she saved our home when you couldn't." "I don't know, Marcus. I just don't know if I can trust you not to hurt us again." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with my mother, mostly listening while Marcus apparently made his case for reconciliation. When she finally hung up, she looked exhausted but oddly peaceful. "What did he say?" Tyler asked. He wants to come back. Says he's learned his lesson, found steady work, stopped gambling, says he loves me and wants to be part of our family again. What did you tell him? My mother looked at me, then at Tyler, then back at me. I told him I needed time to think. But honestly, I've been thinking for months already. The house has been so peaceful without him. Tyler's doing better in school. I'm sleeping through the night, and for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home. So, what are you going to do? I'm going to tell him no, she said quietly. Not because I don't love him, but because I love myself and my children more. Jessica risked everything to save this family, and I'm not going to let Marcus destroy what she's built just because he's finally realized what he lost. That afternoon, Tyler and I drove around Bakersfield while my mother rested. We talked about his college plans, about my new job, about what it felt like to suddenly have financial security after years of uncertainty. But mostly, we talked about Marcus and what his absence meant for our family. Do you think he's really changed? Tyler asked as we sat in the parking lot of our old high school. Maybe, I said. But change isn't just about wanting to be different. It's about proving you can be different when circumstances get difficult. Marcus had every opportunity to change while he was still living with us, but he chose his pride over our security every single time. Mom seems relieved that he's gone. She is. And that tells you everything you need to know about what their relationship was really like. That evening, I found my mother in the backyard watering the small vegetable garden she'd planted after Marcus left. She looked up when she heard me approaching, and I could see that she'd been crying. Second thoughts? I asked gently. No, not second thoughts. Just grief, I guess. Not for Marcus specifically, but for the idea of what I thought our marriage could be. I kept hoping he would grow up, take responsibility, become the partner I needed him to be. It's hard to let go of hope, even when hope becomes a burden. We sat together on the back steps as the sun set over the San Joaquin Valley. For the first time in years, the silence between us was comfortable instead of tense. Jessica, my mother said eventually, I owe you an apology that's 3 years overdue. Mom, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I chose his insecurity over your ambition. I chose his fear over your potential. I let a weak man convince me that my strong daughter was somehow the problem. And because of that choice, you faced homelessness, financial hardship, and years of family rejection when you should have been supported and celebrated. I felt tears building behind my eyes. I understand why you made those choices, Mom. You were trying to keep your marriage together. I was trying to avoid conflict, she corrected. There's a difference. Real love sometimes requires conflict, standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. I failed you because I was too scared to fight for you. But you're fighting now. She squeezed my hand. Now I have something worth fighting for. I have a daughter who turned herself into exactly the kind of person I always hoped she could become. I have a son who's seeing what's possible when someone refuses to accept limitations. And I have a home that's secure because someone I raised had the strength and intelligence to save it. We talked until the stars came out, sharing stories and memories and dreams for the future. When I finally went to bed that night, I realized that the hollow feeling I'd been carrying since my return had been replaced by something warmer and more substantial. I hadn't just saved my family's house. I'd saved my family. And in the process, I'd discovered that the daughter they'd thrown away for being too big for her britches had grown up to be exactly the right size for the challenges life had given her. The girl who left Bakersfield with nothing but determination and a torn acceptance later was returning to San Francisco as a woman who understood her own power. And this time, no one would ever again mistake her kindness for weakness or her success for selfishness. The real lesson wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about what happens when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your own. It was about the difference between proving them wrong and proving yourself right. And tomorrow, I would begin the next chapter of that proof. 2 years later, I was standing in the executive conference room of Martinez Consulting Solutions, my own company, looking out at the San Francisco skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that I'd paid for with profits from the worthless education Marcus had once mocked. The irony of my company's name wasn't lost on anyone who knew my story. I'd taken the surname that Marcus had dismissed along with my dreams and turned it into a brand that Fortune 500 companies now sought out for strategic guidance. My assistant knocked on the door. "Jessica, your 3 p.m. is here. Connor Walsh from Precision Business Solutions." I smiled, remembering my encounter with Connor at that Berkeley alumni event 18 months earlier. After our conversation, he'd spent 6 months developing a proper business plan for serving smaller businesses, the exact market I'd identified during our TechFlow internship years ago. When he'd finally swallowed his pride enough to ask for my help, I'd agreed to mentor him, not out of charity, but because his hard-earned humility had transformed him into someone worth investing in. "Send him in." Connor entered looking confident, but respectful, a far cry from the arrogant MBA who'd dismissed my insights years earlier. His company was now thriving, serving over 200 small businesses across California with affordable marketing solutions. More importantly, he'd learned to listen to people whose experiences differed from his own privileged background. "Jessica, I wanted to give you the Q3 numbers in person," he said, placing a folder on my desk. "Revenue is up 340% from last year. We're profitable, sustainable, and expanding into Oregon next month." I opened the folder and reviewed his financials. Solid growth, excellent client retention, smart expansion strategy. "This is impressive work, Connor. You've built exactly the kind of business I was describing during that internship." "With your guidance," he said. "I never would have understood this market without your insights, and I definitely wouldn't have had the humility to ask the right questions if you hadn't put me in my place that night at the networking event." We discussed his expansion plans for another hour. When Connor left, I found myself reflecting on how many people from my past had reached out over the years, some seeking opportunities, others offering apologies, and a few simply trying to understand how the scholarship kid they'd underestimated had become someone whose advice they now valued. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Graduation ceremony starts in 2 hours. You still coming, right?" I smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Save me a seat next to Mom." Tyler was graduating from UC Davis with his engineering degree, a journey I'd helped make possible with both financial support and constant encouragement. Unlike me, he'd never faced family opposition to his educational goals. If anything, he'd had to live up to the example I'd set, which came with its own pressures but also its own advantages. The drive to Davis gave me time to think about everything that had changed since that night Marcus threw my acceptance letter in the trash. My consulting firm now employed 12 people and had contracts with companies I'd only dreamed of working with as a college student. I owned 2 properties, the family house in Bakersfield, which my mother maintained beautifully, and a condo in San Francisco that overlooked the bay. Most importantly, I'd built the kind of financial security that meant my family would never again face the vulnerability that desperation creates. But the real transformation wasn't about money or professional success. It was about power, not the kind that comes from dominating others, but the kind that comes from being so secure in your own capabilities that other people's opinions lose their ability to wound you. At Tyler's graduation, I watched my mother beam with pride as her son walked across the stage to receive his diploma. She looked healthy, happy, and 10 years younger than she had during those dark months when Marcus's financial irresponsibility had been slowly killing her spirit. The oxygen tank was gone, replaced by the kind of vibrant energy that comes from living without constant stress. "I can't believe both my children are college graduates," she whispered to me as Tyler shook hands with the dean. "Sometimes I think about that night when Marcus threw your letter away, and I wonder how different things would have been if I'd stood up for you then. We can't change the past, Mom, but look what the present gave us instead." After the ceremony, Tyler found us in the crowd of families celebrating outside the pavilion. His girlfriend Sarah was with him, a smart, ambitious pre-law student who reminded me of myself at that age, full of dreams and determination to build something meaningful. "So," Tyler said, grinning as he posed for photos with his diploma. "Ready to hire your first family member at Martinez Consulting?" I laughed. "Finish your graduate program first, then we'll talk about whether you're qualified to work for me." It was a running joke between us, but there was truth underneath it. Tyler understood that the opportunities I could provide him had to be earned, not inherited. The lesson of Marcus's entitlement and failure had been absorbed by both of us, in different ways and for different reasons. During the drive back to the Bay Area, my phone rang with a call I'd been expecting but dreading. Jennifer Walsh, my attorney, had been handling a legal matter that had dragged on for months. "Jessica, I have news about Marcus." "What kind of news?" "He's filed for bankruptcy, complete financial collapse, lost his job in Fresno, got evicted from his apartment, and apparently owes money to several different creditors beyond just the gambling debts." I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of grim vindication. "Where is he now?" "Living in his truck, according to the paperwork. His cousin Dave kicked him out after he borrowed money and didn't pay it back." "Jessica, he's also filed a legal claim against the house in Bakersfield. He's alleging that the transfer was fraudulent and that he has community property rights." I pulled over to the side of the highway, needing to focus completely on this conversation. "Does he have a case?" "None whatsoever. He wasn't on the deed, never contributed to mortgage payments, and voluntarily signed the quitclaim deed. Plus, we have documentation of his abandonment of the property during your mother's medical crisis. But he might be desperate enough to cause problems, and desperate people sometimes file nuisance lawsuits hoping for settlement money." "What do you recommend?" "Countersue for harassment and frivolous litigation. Make it clear that pursuing this claim will cost him more than he could ever hope to gain. In his current financial state, that should be enough to shut this down." That evening, I called my mother to warn her about Marcus's legal maneuvering. I expected her to be upset or worried, but her response surprised me. "Let him file whatever he wants," she said calmly. "I'm not afraid of him anymore, Jessica. He can't take away what you've built for us, and he can't make me doubt my decisions. All he can do is prove, one more time, that choosing you over him was the smartest thing I ever did. You're not concerned about the stress of litigation? Honey, I spent 5 years living in constant stress because of that man's poor choices. A little legal paperwork that I know will win? That's nothing compared to wondering every month whether we'd lose our home because he spent grocery money on poker games." Her confidence was remarkable and telling. The woman who had once been too intimidated to stand up to Marcus's financial irresponsibility was now completely unafraid of his legal threats. She'd learned something important about the difference between real power and the illusion of power that bullies project. Marcus's lawsuit was dismissed 3 months later, just as Jennifer had predicted. The judge ruled that his claims were frivolous and awarded us attorney's fees, though we knew we'd never collect them from someone living in his truck. More importantly, the dismissal came with a restraining order preventing him from contacting our family or pursuing further legal harassment. The final vindication came in an unexpected form 6 months after that. I was having lunch at a restaurant near my office when I spotted a familiar figure bussing tables in the back corner. Marcus looked older, thinner, and utterly defeated. His hair was gray, his clothes were worn, and he moved with the careful efficiency of someone who couldn't afford to lose another job. For a moment, I considered leaving without acknowledging him. But something made me approach his section and sit at one of his tables. When he looked up from wiping down the table next to mine, our eyes met. The recognition was mutual and immediate. "Jessica," he said quietly. His voice held none of the arrogance or entitlement I remembered. I work. Here, I can see that." He stood there for a moment, clearly unsure whether to walk away or attempt conversation. Finally, he said, How's your mother? She's well, happy, healthy. The house is beautiful. She's turned the backyard into an amazing garden. Marcus nodded, slowly. And Tyler? Graduated from UC Davis last month. Engineering degree. He's starting graduate school in the fall. That's good. Really good. He paused, fidgeting with his cleaning rag. I heard about your business, Martinez Consulting. People say you're doing real well. I am. Another long pause. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I was wrong. About the college thing. About everything. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found only exhaustion and genuine regret. Marcus, being wrong isn't the worst thing that happened here. The worst thing was that you were so committed to being wrong that you couldn't recognize when you were destroying your own family. I know? He glanced around to make sure his manager wasn't watching, then looked back at me. Can I ask you something? Do you hate me? I considered the question seriously. Did I hate him? Had I ever really hated him? Or had I just been angry and hurt and determined to prove him wrong? No, I said finally. I don't hate you, Marcus. I just learned to stop letting your opinion of me matter more than my opinion of myself. I ruined everything, didn't I? You made choices that had consequences. The difference is, now you're living with those consequences instead of expecting other people to rescue you from them. Marcus looked like he wanted to say more, but his manager was approaching, clearly unhappy about an employee having extended conversations with customers. I should let you get back to work, I said, standing up. Jessica, he called as I turned to leave. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. I stopped and looked back at him one last time. You're right, Marcus. You should have. As I walked back to my office, I realized that encounter had provided the closure I hadn't even known I needed. Not because Marcus had apologized or acknowledged his mistakes, though he had, but because seeing him in that restaurant had made something crystal clear. The man who had once seemed so threatening, so determined to limit my potential, was just a scared, insecure person who had let his fears control his choices. His power over me had been an illusion that I'd helped maintain by caring too much about his approval and by believing that his limitations had to become mine. The girl who had left home with nothing but a torn acceptance letter and unshakable determination had become a woman who understood something fundamental about success. It's not about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. That evening, I called my mother and Tyler to tell them about the encounter with Marcus. We talked for over an hour about forgiveness, about growth, about the strange ways that life sometimes brings things full circle. Do you think he's really changed? My mother asked. I think he's been humbled, I said. Whether that leads to real change depends on what he does with that humility. But honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. His growth or lack of growth isn't our responsibility. What is our responsibility? Tyler asked. I thought about that question as I looked out at the city lights from my office window. Our responsibility is to keep building something beautiful with the opportunities we've been given. To make sure that the next kid who gets kicked out for having big dreams has examples to follow, and people who believe in them. And that's exactly what we've done. My mother volunteers at a local nonprofit that helps first-generation college students navigate the application process. Tyler mentors high school students interested in engineering. And I've established a scholarship fund at Berkeley specifically for students who are facing family opposition to their educational goals. The scholarship is called the Too Big for Your Britches Fund, and every year I get letters from recipients telling me how that phrase, once used to shame them, has become a source of pride and motivation. Because here's what I learned from this entire experience. Sometimes being too big for your britches is exactly what the situation requires. Sometimes outgrowing the limitations that others want to impose on you is the most important thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The daughter they threw away for wanting an education became the person who secured their future. The girl they called ungrateful became the woman who gave them more than they ever gave her. The child they said was too big for her, britches grew up to be exactly the right size for every challenge life presented. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you refuse to let other people's fears define your possibilities. That's what happens when you bet on yourself even when no one else will. And that's what happens when you discover that the thing they called your biggest flaw was actually your greatest strength all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.